Good morning, everyone. I'm Jessica. Today, we're going to be working on block 14 of the 2023 Scrappy Sampler. Let's get started. I have my fabric ready here. I'm starting with a 13.5-inch square of my background. I'm using it a little bit bigger because I'm going to hand applique it, and then I'm going to trim it down to the 12.5-inch size that this block is. The first thing we're going to do, just while I have this fabric here, is to press it in half one way. And then I'm going to take it and fold it and press it in half the other way. This is going to help us center our applique on this background. So when I open it up, I'm left with something like this. This applique has 4 pieces. They are all exactly the same, so I have my eye template here. And what we're going to do is we're going to applique this piece in each quadrant with the points meeting in the middle. So I'm going to set this background square aside and start working on the applique. I'm going to use a freezer paper method here. So I have freezer paper, I have this shiny side, which is here, and I'm facing that down on my pressing station. And I'm going to press that right to the pressing board. Then I'm going to take a second piece of freezer paper and put it directly on top and press this to the other one. The shiny side is down again. And I'm going to repeat that one more time for a total of 3 pieces of freezer paper, all fused together, shiny sides down on all of them. And after this is pressed, I'm going to give it a minute to cool because this really retains the heat. And then I'm going to lift it up off my board because it will have stuck a little bit. And I have this nice, thick template that I'm going to use for my applique. The next step is going to be to take your applique piece and to place it on top of the freezer paper and trace it. And you want to just trace this as exactly as you can, because this is going to determine the shape of the piece that we are appliquing to the block. There we go. So I have that drawn on there, and I'm going to cut it out. I'm almost finished cutting this out. And now I have my freezer paper template. This is nice and thick because we fused 3 layers together, and we're going to use this to make our applique pieces. This is the fabric that I'm going to be using for the applique piece. So I have the template we just made. You can still tell if you look at it, one side is shiny and one side is dull. I'm going to place the shiny side down onto the wrong side of the fabric. And I'm making sure here that I have at least about 1/4 inch on every side of this. And then I'm just going to take my iron and I'm going to press the template onto the fabric. And because the shiny side is down, this will stick. And now we can use this while it's stuck to it and cut our seam allowance on here. So I'm going to go for about 1/4 inch. I've talked about applique in some of the other videos and mentioning how a seam allowance is kind of something each appliquer decides based on their preferences. So I want you to maybe just experiment a little bit and see. It ranges anywhere between 1/4 inch, 3/8 inch, a little less, a little more. It's kind of all based on preference. So here I'm going to use about 1/4 inch. And now I have my seam allowance on my template. My template is fused to the fabric, and we can proceed to the next step. For the next step, I'm going to use some starch. This is the starch I'm using. And I'm going to spray some starch into the lid of the canister. And then I'm just going to use my finger to starch a small section of the seam allowance that's hanging over. Next, I'm going to use my hot iron to press the seam allowance in toward the template, letting the starch just set the fabric in the right direction. Okay, this looks good to me so far. Just have a look here. So this is all set really nicely against here. And from the front, we have this really nice shape. And we're just gonna continue on. I kind of like to work left to right. So I turn the whole piece, but I'm gonna start working, you know, this way now. And if you starch too much at once, it will dry and it won't work. So only starch, you know, what you can manage at once. Now I'm just going to bring, you can use, I use my fingers. I prefer to use my fingers here, but if you're worried about burning your fingers, you can use like a stiletto or even like a seam ripper, just something to hold it in place while you bring your iron over to it. Now for these little corners, I kind of do like a tuck. It's hard to see this. So for these little corners, I kind of do a tuck here, and now this part that I'm tucking is in line with the template, and then I just fold it back over. If it gets too bulky, it'll make like a weird, it won't come to like a nice point, but I don't think we're there yet. So I am going to hold this in place. Just let this really sit there. I don't want to scorch or burn anything, but I want that corner to get really nice. And then I'm just gonna go back along and just make sure everything on this side is laying nicely before I progress to the other side. And as soon as this finished, I finished. And here is what it looks like. So the corner is really nice. It's really nice from the front too. And then so is the rest of my seam. And all we have left now is this other side. Kind of exactly the same as we did the other ones. The corner shape feels a little bit different. It doesn't feel as like strong as these when you're working at it, because like the angles of the corner are a little bit different, but I use the exact same process. And you can see it looks really good from the back and the front. So now we have our template piece. This is all ready. I'm just going to let it cool a minute because it's super hot. Now that it's cool, I'm going to gently open this up and just peel the template out. It will just come right off. It was stuck, but it comes off very easily. And then I'm just gonna use my fingers to make sure these seam allowances go back to exactly how they were before. I'm gonna press on top of them just to really get them into place where they should be. And if you feel like you want to starch here again, you can. Just a light spritz over the top. If you spray too much, especially directly on the seams, I find that they open the seams up a little bit. Like where you spray will kind of like relax with the starch and start to slowly open up. So be careful how much you're spraying there. And then you can flip it around to the front if you want and give it a little light starch from the front. And then press it again. And this is one of our template shapes that we're going to be using. We need 4 of these exact. Now you could do, this particular block, I'm making all of my shapes in exactly the same color, but if you wanted, you could do different colors. You can choose how you want to place that. But I'm gonna do all 4 grains, so I'm gonna work on 3 more and then we'll start appliquing. Okay, so I've made all 4 of my applique pieces using the freezer paper method. And I have my background block here, which still has the grid pressed into it. When I applique these on, I will do one at a time, but I just want to show you here the idea. So what you need to do is match the point to the center point of each applique. And you want to get them right next to each other. The points all need to be touching here for this block to lay correctly. Like that. And then you will one at a time pin them or glue them in place however you work, or if you like to do more than one at a time, that's fine too. After you have them all laid out with the points touching, You just need to keep in mind that these pieces might need to be angled a little differently. The correct angle is kind of just straight up to the corner. And the way that I check that besides my eyes looking at them to see if I like the way they look, the way that I check to make sure that this is okay is I get my 12.5-inch square ruler and I put it on top. What I'm doing here is I'm making sure that none of my applique pieces go within the 1/4 inch seam allowance. So once I have these appliqued, I will be trimming this extra away so that it's a 12.5-inch block like my ruler. But what I'm checking is I'm making sure that none of the applique pieces are into my 1/4 inch seam allowance. And if they are, I'm adjusting them a little bit. I can see here, this one is going 1/8 inch past the 1/4 inch seam allowance. But I can see right here on this side, I have 1/8 inch of room. So what I'll do before I glue this or pin this down is I'm going to adjust the applique underneath so that everything is in the actual block that we will see, the finished portion, the 12-inch finished, which means that there's a 1/4 inch around the whole block that I will be sewing into, and I'm making sure none of the applique is there. And once I'm satisfied with that, and I'm making sure that none of my points are going beyond that 1/4 inch, then I can glue or pin them into place. So I decided to actually just pin all my petals in place and just give it a try. I know I just said that I usually work on one part at a time and then I go back and add the rest, but you know, I feel like finding your favorite way to do stuff is all about experimenting, and if you don't try other methods, then you don't know. So I'm gonna give this a try. I'm threading my needle now, and I am going to try hand appliquing these with them all pinned at once. And we will see how it goes. Just like I hand appliqued my other box, I'm following the same method. Since I'm using green here and all my pieces are green, I decided to match my thread to my applique piece. And I am holding my piece steady with my hand. I go down into the fabric right where my last stitch came up, and then I come up about 1/8 inch in front of that, and I'm just grabbing like the side of the applique instead of the top. That helps hide the stitches a little bit. And you just keep repeating that process all the way across this whole length and around the whole shape. I've gone around and appliqued every petal here, and I'm coming to the end. I have maybe just one more stitch here on the front. Okay, and then I just go straight down to the back of the work, and I'll tie this off. This is kind of just like I did in my other video, the tulip one. I make a knot in the thread, and I usually try to do a double knot. So after the first knot, what I'm going to do is put my needle right where the second knot is. I put my needle right where the first knot is, and then I just pull the thread, and that guides my so I'm just making my knot here, and I did a double knot. And then what I'm going to do is, just like I did in my tulip video, I'm going in between the layers. So I'm under the background fabric, but I'm also under the front fabric so that you can't see any of this happening. And I come up a distance away from where I started. I pull the needle out, And then this knot is gonna go right up to the fabric there. But what I do is I just grab a good hold of the thread, and then I put my finger on this so it doesn't like make this big. I put my finger on the knot so it's a little bit controlled, and then I just tug that thread. And what will happen is the knot will go into the fabric and it will secure the applique, and then you can just come over here and cut that. And I have finished appliquing this block. Then, as I mentioned before, when we were placing the petals, I made my background square bigger so I didn't have to worry about any shrinkage from hand appliquing, and now I'm trimming it down to size. I want it to be 12.5 inches, so I'm using a 12.5 inch ruler. I already cut the first 2 sides, and as I did this, I'm just making sure none of the edges go beyond the 1/4 inch mark of my ruler, because then they would be under my seam allowance and we wouldn't see them perfectly, so we don't want that. So I'm just matching up the second side. I matched my ruler up with the bottom and my left, and then I'm just going to go ahead and trim this excess. And we are left with a 12.5 inch square block that's ready to be used. Here's our block. I hope you had a fun time making this with me. I know I sure did. And I hope you enjoyed the blocks that we've made so far. There are many, many more to come. So thank you for sewing along with me and following along on this journey. See you soon.